I was assigned to Conference Room 3B of the Palais de Verre because my resume said I spoke idiomatic Eldovan as well as Kymric, two languages that had not shared a political table for 84 years. In practice, that meant I would be sitting behind a smoked glass booth interpreting between two delegations who had spent those same 84 years blaming each other for the disputed isthmus and the last 6 months mobilizing troops along its border. I'd interpreted for finance ministers and popes and an astronaut once, but today was my first time accompanying heads of state who were one careless verb away from artillery. The United Nations had upgraded its audio system since I'd last been here. The technician handed me a sleek graphite earpiece, lighter than a paperclip and allegedly braided with machine learning acoustic clarifiers. My standard headphones would have been fine. Nuance tends to travel better through bulkier hardware. Still, I nodded, fitted the device, and began my breathing exercises. President Alice Shun of Kimria entered first, flanked by her foreign minister and a pair of aides flicking at holotabs. Chancellor Dragon Lorne of Eldova strode in moments later, a craggy man who wore his uniform jacket like it was still the 1970s. They sat, placed their tablets on the polished sablewood, and waited for the cameras to red dot. The moderator, an Argentine diplomat famous for never raising her voice, welcomed both sides and reminded them the world was listening. She pressed her thumb to a console. A soft chime signaled the interpretation channels were live. I listened to Dragon Lorne speak first. His Eldovan arrived at my ears unfiltered, every guttural consonant clear. We come willing to exhaust every diplomatic avenue. War is catastrophe. Yet we will not permit asymmetric provocations to continue. A straightforward sentence. That was my job. But inside the booth, my console flashed the English. It was simultaneously feeding the room through other translators' mics and to the delegates through their own earpieces. We come willing to exhaust every diplomatic avenue. Catastrophic provocations will not continue. I blinked. Catastrophic provocations. That was not what he'd said. The words, "war is catastrophe, yet we will not permit," had disappeared. In their place, the software had spliced something that sounded combative, though still grammatical. Maybe a glitch, I told myself. I rendered the sentence faithfully anyway, trusting my voice would override whatever the network had garbled. My channel was point-to-point to the moderator and the press gallery, separate from the delegates' personal feeds. Alice Shun responded in clipped Kymric. Kimria remains open to compromise about shipping lanes, provided Eldova withdraw its missile batteries. My augmented subtitles fed to the big screen read the same thing, or so it seemed at first glance. Kimria remains open to compromise about shipping lanes, provided Eldova withdraw. Nothing about missile batteries. The phrase had vanished, leaving a conditional that sounded absolute. Without context, it looked like a demand for full troop withdrawal, not a limited missile redeployment. My pulse thudded. 2 errors was a pattern. "Madam Moderator," I said quietly on the interpreter back channel, "the live subtitles are dropping phrases, possibly a software issue." The moderator, eyes never leaving her tablet, replied, "Understood, Isabel. It is monitoring." I wished I believed her. The meeting rolled forward. Each time one leader walked a sentence toward peace, the official English consumed by everyone except me trimmed off the weight-reducing words war, missile, share, negotiate, compromise, later, willing. The deletions were surgical. What remained turned a cautious overture into a dare. After 20 minutes, the mood frayed. Lorne's knuckles whitened. Shun resorted to archaic honorifics that signaled disgust. Cameras zoomed. Analysts on every continent would soon parse our feed in real time. I tried a test. When Lorne spoke Eldovan again, I delivered my English rendition, careful, measured, then added one extra phrase that did not exist in the original. "We propose a 48-hour suspension of exercises as a gesture of sincerity." I watched the delegates' faces through the glass. Neither side reacted. Their earpieces hadn't transmitted my improvisation. Yet the press gallery's monitors, piped from my channel, dutifully displayed my invented line. The divide was clear. Only the negotiating principals were receiving the doctored stream. Cold sweat slicked my palms. Someone wanted this summit to fail, and had filtered the audio accordingly. I switched to the back channel again. Moderator Leah, my words aren't reaching the principals. Their devices are on a separate audio layer. We see no discrepancy, she replied. But her eyes, enlarged briefly on the booth monitor, told me she had just been reminded not to see one. The technician who had given me the new earpiece was gone. His toolbox remained, lid half closed. Alyosha, the Eldovan deputy, tapped his mic. Chancellor Lorne requests clarification. President Shun has apparently demanded total withdrawal of Eldovan forces before discussing trade corridors. Is that accurate? It is, Shun answered, baffled. That was not what she'd said. Yet from her look, I realized she too had been denied her own words. She believed the Eldovans had misheard, not that the equipment betrayed her. Lightning strikes of intuition sometimes spare interpreters. I had one then. The earpieces used by heads of state incorporated active noise cancellation reliant on predictive text compression. If the firmware were tweaked to mute flagged lexemes, it could invisibly rewrite meaning. The scam depended on nobody else hearing the unfiltered source. Only I, with my single graphite bud patched to a direct mic feed, could verify the sabotage. And if I spoke up on the record, I would either be dismissed as a technician's error, or worse, intruding upon deliberations. Interpreters are ghosts. Once they manifest, the seance ends. Still, the room was sliding toward calamity. Lorne's staff began uploading satellite images of Kimrick frigates. Shun's advisors retorted with intelligence on Eldovan artillery. I glanced at the technician's toolbox. A pair of signal routers peeked out, blinking amber. Someone had inserted physical relay gear onto the private delegate channel. If I could yank the right cable, the principals would suddenly receive my unfiltered voice instead of the doctored one. I sent a whisper over my private channel to the only person I trusted here, Mariah, a junior interpreter stationed in room 4A. We had studied at Geneva together. I dropped a coded phrase we used in school, Café Red, extra sugar, meaning, meet me now, no questions. While the delegation switched to a 10-minute recess, microphones muted but cameras streaming wide shots, I stepped out of the booth, heart hammering. A security guard eyed me. I flashed my official badge and pretended to stretch. Maria arrived from the adjacent corridor. Isabel, what's on fire? I explained in a rush. The omissions, the selective feed, the probability of engineered miscommunication. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was fury. They'll spin this into casus belli, she said. Who gains? Arms manufacturers, splinter factions, anyone selling oil futures. Too many suspects. I asked her to cover my booth for 2 minutes. Keep speaking as though you're me. Repeat whatever you hear. My voice print wasn't locked to the channel. The system would treat her as me, as long as she used my console. What are you doing? She asked. Hard reset. I pocketed a mini multi-tool from the technician's box, palmed a signal router small enough to hide inside my blazer sleeve, and walked the perimeter of conference room 3B like a server who had forgotten the soup. No one noticed. Delegates were still poring over their notes. I circled behind the draping where the audio cables fed into the table. 3 labeled lines: Master, Press, Delegate. The delegate line had an inline device glowing faint green. The rogue rotor. I breathed, counted to 3, and flicked open the clasp. 2 micro-connectors popped free. The earpieces of both heads of state went silent simultaneously. They looked up, puzzled. Before security could intervene, I slid my own graphite bud's output jack into the delegate port, then reconnected the master line to it, bypassing the manipulator. I'd effectively made myself the sole channel feeding their ears. Any word I spoke now would reach them, unfiltered. Mariah's voice flowed from my booth microphone describing the coffee service, improvising to stall. Eldovin and Kemrick alike stared at their earpieces, confused but hearing her. I ran back to the booth, motioned Maria aside, and resumed the mic. Honored delegates, I spoke in English first, then repeated in flawless Kemrick and Eldovin. There has been a technical malfunction. Until resolved, I will translate your words directly without automated assistance. Please proceed. The room froze. The moderator, suddenly stripped of plausible deniability, pressed her console frantically, but the feed overrides were mine now. Cameras still rolled. Millions might be watching. She could not order me silenced without revealing the glitch. President Shun leaned forward. Interpreter, earlier I stated we were open to compromise if Eldova withdrew missile batteries only. Did Chancellor Lorne hear that? I translated accurately. Lorne's eyebrows arched. No, I was told total withdrawal, I relayed back. Shun's face thawed a millimeter. The tension in the room exhaled as reality surfaced, naked and wincing. Chancellor Lorne spoke again. We are prepared to discuss the missile redeployment. War is catastrophe. That remains my position. This time, every ear heard the words intact. Even the cameras caught them. The moderator tried to interrupt, citing protocol. I kept translating. My contract obliged me to fidelity. Protocol was subordinate. Security advanced toward the booth. Maria blocked the door, waving her credential. Active session, she barked. Dragon Lorne seized the moment. Madam President, I propose an immediate joint inspection of the Isthmus missile sites by neutral observers. Accepted, Shun responded before anyone coached her. In exchange, Eldovin Command suspends live-fire drills within 50 kilometers for 10 days. I gave the words wings. The aides scribbled. Advisors whispered they could shape that into a ceasefire framework. The moderator finally found her spine. A recess is in order while we verify technical integrity, she declared, voice icy. Cameras cut to the blue UN emblem. The feed ended for the public. Inside the room, however, adrenaline still drummed. Security escorted me to a marble corridor. My badge was scanned twice. The confiscated router dangled in a plastic evidence bag. A man in a gray suit, no visible insignia, asked for my statement. I described exactly what I'd discovered. He listened, expressionless, and then asked the question I knew was coming. How did you know which device to disconnect without approval? Because it was the one altering the delegate's perception, I said. My duty is to truth in language. He typed notes. The contractor for these earpieces is bidding on several defense projects. You understand the implications? I understand that mistranslating leaders toward war is not a procurement dispute. He studied me another moment, then surprised me with a nod. Report back tomorrow. The inquiry will need your testimony. I spent the night in my apartment overlooking the Rhone. Sleepless. Whose fingerprints would appear on that rotor? How many other summits had been nudged by subtle erasure? A translator's job is to vanish. Yesterday I had become visible, and visibility was danger. Morning arrived with fog and sirens. My compad chimed, a curt message instructing me to meet in a sub-basement conference cell. I half expected detention. Instead, I found President Shun and Chancellor Lorne seated at a small table. No aides, no cameras. Only the man in the gray suit, whom they now addressed as Deputy Secretary Mbeki. Mbeki gestured to the empty chair. Ms. Reyes, please interpret for our private session. I sat, earpiece coiled in my lap like a tame serpent. Lorne began in Eldovin. We owe Ms. Reyes thanks. Had we proceeded on the false transcript, my parliament would already be drafting mobilization orders. Shun responded in Kymric, and mine would have matched them troop for troop. Her vigilance spared us a regional war. They looked at me, eyes unarmored by diplomacy. Gratitude is rare currency in this profession. Its interest compounds guilt. I nodded, unable to find a neutral phrase. Mbeki continued, slower. We have traced the compromised hardware to a shell corporation linked to Marathi systems. He paused to let me interpret. Both leaders inhaled sharply. Marathi was Eldova's largest defense contractor, but Kimria purchased its drones as well. A rogue asset? Shun wondered. Or a sanctioned gambit, Lorne muttered, face rigid. Mbeki placed a sealed dossier on the table. Internal security will investigate. Meanwhile, there is an opportunity. Publicly, we announce yesterday's breakthrough: inspection teams, suspended drills, a roadmap to a bilateral treaty. Privately, we form a technical working group on communication safeguards, co-chaired by your offices, curated by Ms. Reyes. My throat constricted. Co-chaired by me. You are the reason this working group exists, Mbeki said, and you are trusted by both sides. Was I? Trust is fragile, like language itself. Yet in their eyes I saw acceptance. We spent 2 hours drafting a joint declaration. I built parallel glossaries ensuring no concept wandered astray between Eldovan toughness and Kimric poetic double negatives. When the statement was finalized, Lorne's calloused finger hovered above the final clause. I want this line exactly, he said. Let no manipulation of words become the artillery of the next war. I translated. Shun nodded. Include my signature. The press conference erupted worldwide. Headlines read, Historic Isthmus, Ceasefire Brokered, Hidden Translation Plot Uncovered. My name surfaced in leaks. Journalists besieged my inbox. I declined interviews. The spotlight would soon shift elsewhere, as spotlights do, and I intended to retreat to the booth where I belonged. But exile from anonymity takes time. Committees summoned me to testify about linguistic integrity in the age of AI. Universities begged me to lecture. I accepted none. I only agreed to the one meeting that mattered, the technical working group. We convened monthly. Engineers from both nations deconstructed audio protocols, inserted redundancies that forbade unilateral word deletion. We drafted a charter stipulating that any device used in negotiations be open source, logs publicly auditable. It was neither glamorous nor lucrative, just necessary. 6 months later, missiles were still in their bunkers, trade across the isthmus had quietly increased 12%, and an unmarked envelope arrived at my doorstep. Inside was a thin sheet of vellum bearing 2 signatures, Kimric and Eldovan. Beneath the printed words, Ms. Isabel Reyes, guardian of unbroken sentences. A medal accompanied it, the smallest I had ever seen, no larger than a comma. Perfect. A comma asks the speaker to breathe, to consider, to prolong understanding before moving on. I pinned it inside my jacket where no camera could find it. Sometimes I dream about the summit, not the shouting, but the moments just after I pulled the cable, when for the first time both leaders heard each other honestly. The room felt lighter, as if language itself had unclenched its fists. I have returned to obscurity, back in booths where my voice walks other people's words across the tightrope of context. Yet every time I fit an earpiece, I remember how easily a single missing word can tilt history. So I listen harder, translating not only tongues but silences, determined that the next war, if it must come, will be waged on choices honestly spoken rather than on phrases ghosted out of existence. And if ever again I sense the hush of manipulation in my headset, I know which cable to pull.